I'm not sure if my undying desire to understand the nature of this human experience is a blessing or a curse. After over a decade of immersing myself into consciousness exploration, with hopes of finding answers to those eternal questions, I now have more questions than when I started. The nature of this experience seems to always be just beyond the reach of our science, technology, and consciousness collective.
Where to start when trying to understand the biggest mystery of all time? Why are we here? And all the incredible questions surrounding that. Is there an afterlife? Are we reincarnated? What is God? How do synchronicities and synchronistic events fit into the human experience? Why do some people have profound spiritual, paranormal, or extraterrestrial contact experiences, while most of us just lead ordinary lives? Maybe we can start with something we all experience: dreams.
I am a student. I'm an academic student right now. I'm a PhD student in the field of integral noetic science with an anomalous studies concentration. So that's looking at all sorts of anomalous events. In particular, I'm focused on the ET or NHI, that's non-human intelligence, contact phenomenon in dreams. I am just fascinated by this wide range of phenomena that people can have, these encounters. I was really guided to this path of study and service really through my own dreams, through my own encounters that have led me on a path. I see that now as a sort of shamanic path. From the mainstream perspective, right, dreams are sort of emerge out of the brain and is sort of seen as defragmenting the hard drive, or maybe you need wish fulfillment, maybe a simulation of events. And I think those are all really, really fair assessments of some dreams. I think in terms of when we build a map of the dream world, it's not either or, it's nesting doll situation, and there's layers upon layers upon layers. You can study all of that through like the physiology, looking at REM versus non-REM dreams. I'm not particularly as interested in the brain as I am in the experience of consciousness. When we compare attitudes towards dreams in Western mainstream cultures with everyone else in the world whatsoever, right? The Western culture is weird in that they don't accept dreams as meaningful or real. Acceptance of dreams as real, that is termed in scholarship as dream shamanism. So dream shamanism, meaning the practice of shamanism using dreams. Framework suggests that all these cultures, regardless of what the culture specifically believes, is that dreams are real. Dreams can be little and big dreams, meaning they require interpretation. Dreams involve interactions with real entities. Dreams are journeys of souls to real places. And all of those experiences have real impact on the waking phase reality. And we generally use or have experiences in those from this perspective to either initiate us into knowledge systems, so to communicate knowledge and messaging from us to the subtle realms, or else to mediate collective and individual fortune, meaning like we need a miraculous healing, or we need that special knowledge or precognition and that sort of thing, or to bring psychological healing. So there's so many things that dreams can do.
You go to sleep and you get to fly around, you get to do all kinds of cool stuff, you get all these odd experiences and these transcendental conversations sometimes that bring back prophetic knowledge for your day-to-day, where it seems that there's a lot of information being given, exchanged, but also a great deal of difficulty in the interpretation and bringing it back and making it useful. Whatever's happening there seems to be something as sort of a screensaver, perhaps, as when we're not physically active in this body, from my perspective. Maybe it's just sort of like a screensaver, just something to do while your body powers down if you need something like that. And then if you think that maybe our role here has something to do with something going on in what we would call that other realm, whatever the other side of the veil is. And it seems to include the psychedelic realm, the paranormal, and dream realms. And NDEs, even if there are layers to this, there seems to be layers of more than we are once you get past this level. It seems that this awareness is a pretty focused point of attention, to where you retard a filter that you normally have infinite access to everything, and you retard that for a little bit to come down here, air quotes, to do something, and to what you're passionate about. And maybe it is all just a ride, and maybe part of this ride is us taking this too seriously. And maybe dreams are here to help us go, hey, hang on, maybe you're taking it a little too seriously if we just kind of look at it this way, or let me offer you this, rather than it's an interesting dynamic to this static feeling world. It does add such an element of mystery to this place.
Modern science and technology has only taken us so far with our understanding of things like dreams. Some people's experiences may even lend evidence to the multiverse or multi-worlds theory. Essentially, that there are multiple, possibly infinite versions of reality, unfolding simultaneously with varying degrees of difference. And maybe when we're dreaming, we're catching glimpses of any number of these other realities unfolding. Or maybe it's something just as simple as defragging a computer hard drive.
There's a conscious mind. Underneath that is the unconscious mind, and there's imagination in there. The unconscious mind speaks to the conscious mind through dreams, visions, imaginations, and things like that, regardless of the source of that communication from the unconscious, right? So the unconscious can just make stuff up itself, or it can tune into the wisdom of the body or the ancestors. You're picking up on all of those because there are so many different subtle senses and things like that. And the unconscious is sort of bringing all that information in, packaging it up, and sending it to the conscious mind in a way that is effective for the conscious mind. There's an individual system, and then we live in a greater system. And so I say we're all sort of telepathically connected through the collective unconscious or some other mechanism. It's not necessarily clear exactly how that works, but it's clear that many people report things like this. It's a common theme across cultures, is that there is this sort of underlying collective mind thing that is expressing. Just as we have waking phases of consciousness in daily life, then we have dreaming phases, and then there's deep dreamless sleep, they say. So there's a kind of a progression there to this kind of mystical union with everything, or all that is.
Closely related to dreams, more like nightmares, is the phenomena of sleep paralysis. From a scientific and medical perspective, sleep paralysis is nothing more than your mind waking from a sleep state, and your body is still paralyzed, or essentially still sleeping. And anything unusual perceived in that state is just an effect of your mind in the process of waking. But there are many that believe that sleep paralysis may be paranormal in nature.
My name is Vicki Joy Anderson. I was immersed into the real world experience of it. I started suffering from it at about 3 or 4 years old and had it on a pretty regular nightly basis, off and on, until I was about 23. Went away for a little bit, came back with a vengeance in my mid-30s, and I dealt with it again for about another decade. So it was always something that I was aware of. I never talked about it because I'm Gen X, so I'm old enough where if you talked about that kind of stuff, you were schizophrenic or you were demon possessed. Those were kind of the only two explanations, and I really didn't want either label, and I didn't think either label was true, so I just kind of decided to grin and bear it, I kind of started researching it at that point. Now, this was early on. There was the internet, but it was kind of just message boards, and there was no Google, there was no centralized search engines, and so it was very hard to find information if you didn't know exactly where it was. So I kind of just found message boards and talked to other people. And then it wasn't until a few years later, when it came back, that I decided, you know what, I need to get to the bottom of this. I need to figure out what this is and why I'm being targeted. I don't want to say I have answers, because no one really does. There's no such thing as an expert in these areas. But when you start to figure things out and it starts to unravel, and there's other people out there that are dealing with it, the onus is on you to share the wealth and become part of the conversation. Mainstream science, the explanation you're going to get online is a couple of different things. It kind of changes every 10 years. It's either narcolepsy, a form of some sort of sleep disorder, sleep apnea. Now I'm hearing a lot of people, and we're getting closer to the truth now. I'm hearing people saying when you jerk awake suddenly in the middle of REM sleep, this will happen. And so there's natural explanations to it. We can't separate ourselves from our physiology. When we have these experiences, our body is experiencing it too. And I'm absolutely sure that if you stuck probes on our head and we're monitoring our heart rate and all that sort of thing, you would be able to monitor physical fluctuations and bursts of dopamine and adrenaline. You would find probably anomalies going on in the body and in the brain that would be consistent across the board with sleep paralysis sufferers. But the fact that we can't believe the thousands upon thousands of witnesses that say that they are sensing something, either, depending on your worldview, you're going to hear people saying there was something evil, supernatural, astral, demonic. They're all going to use these terms. So just so people understand exactly what we mean when we say this is scary, well, all of the sleep paralysis experiencers online who try to explain this, we've exhausted all of the adjectives: terrifying, horrifying, frightening. There really isn't a word anymore that can adequately describe it if you've never experienced it. There is a sense of dread and foreboding that is supernatural. But the actual experience, it varies, and it can vary tremendously depending on the person. But the classic case, the one that you're going to hear the most, I'm describing now the Gen X baby boomer sleep paralysis experience, because it is now changing for younger generations. But the classic experience is you wake up in your bedroom, or so you think, and you will either see or sense some sort of entity in the room. A lot of people will say they feel something or see something literally sitting on their chest. They will feel like they can't breathe, or they're being crushed, or they're being choked. You can't talk, you can't move. And people will most commonly report seeing shadow people, incubus, succubus, old ladies in rocking chairs, the old hag, the beautiful succubus. They'll report alien grays. Basically, in a nutshell, people are waking up paralyzed. They're sensing or seeing something very evil in the room. It is a multi-layered, extremely complex, many tentacled beast we're dealing with here.
I have experienced sleep paralysis. This was around 2012, 2013. At the time, I wasn't in the best state of mind, going through a divorce, depression, job that I was unhappy with. And I'd say about 50% of the time when I was going to sleep, or even waking up in the middle of the night, I would experience sleep paralysis. The experiences started out with me waking up and becoming aware that I couldn't move, still in a somewhat hypnagogic state. Eventually, I'd be able to pull myself out of that state. But then after time, the experiences became terrifying. In my peripheral vision, I would see shadow figures, either walking in my room, or in the next room, there would be multiple shadow figures walking up and down the hallway. It was like a shadow people party in the next room. Again, like the earlier experiences, I was eventually able to pull myself out of that state when the fear built up enough. The last few experiences I had were the most terrifying. It started out being aware of not being able to move, trying to make myself awaken from that state. Then the shadow people start to appear, walking up and down the hallways. And then the last few experiences, all of this was accompanied by loud banging noises directly above my head, seemingly coming out of the ceiling. They got louder and louder until I was so terrified I would make myself pop out of that state. And this continued until I was able to get myself into a better state of mind, a better emotional state. I no longer have these experiences, but in a way, I'm kind of grateful that I did, because I have an understanding of what it's like to go through this.
I think in many cases, these people are being separated from their bodies. They're being pulled into the astral realm, and they're seeing these things in their natural habitat. It is a hijacking. And here's another word people don't like. It's an abduction.
There are things like sleep paralysis and out of body. Like those kind of dream experiences are very, very similar, but also very different, right? Sleep paralysis involves awareness of your body, and there's perhaps an entity there. It's very similar and different than out of body, where you might be in that sort of vibratory state, you might be paralyzed, you might be with entities, but then there's something that enables you to leave or move. There's this sense of orientating to all these different phenomena, and I personally think of them as sort of all the same, that are activating in different ways.
The phenomena of contact with otherworldly or non-human intelligences can also be experienced through altered states, which can be induced by a variety of methods like meditation or psychedelics. Psychedelics are now rapidly becoming normalized, mainly for therapeutic and mental health purposes. And millions of people around the world are beginning to experience these incredible benefits.
My name is Carlos Tanner. Way back 20 years ago in 2003, I was a pretty functional addict, at least at the beginning of that year, but I was spiraling downward into my demise with heroin addiction and drug addiction. And that had led me in May of 2003 to wake up in my car underwater, having blacked out behind the wheel because of the drugs that I had taken, and driven into a river. That was a really big wake-up moment for me, a real rock bottom moment. Standing there at the edge of that river, looking at my car underwater, made a declaration to myself and to the universe that I would do whatever it took to make a big change in my life, to save my life. About a week later, I got an email from a friend who was on her way back from Japan, having taught English there for a couple of years. And on her way back, she decided to stop in Peru, and she wanted to see the Amazon rainforest. And while she was in Iquitos, Peru, she met two people that told her about a shaman they knew named Don Juan, who used ayahuasca and had ayahuasca ceremonies regularly. And they invited her, and she thought of me because I was very interested in plant medicines. When I got that email, I thought that was the universe responding by showing me the pathway to make that transformation that I now had declared I desired. And so I got on a plane in May of 2003 and flew down to the Amazon rainforest, knowing that this would be a life-changing experience, and it certainly was. I had no idea. I could not have imagined just how profound a transformation it was. It really shattered all of my conceptions about reality and myself and my role in it. And during that time, the shaman Don Juan told me it was my path to be a healer, and he invited me to become his student and to move in with him and live with him and his family and study the plant medicine tradition. So I accepted his offer, and in January 2004, I moved to Iquitos, Peru, and moved in with him and his family, and I lived with him for 4 years. And during that time, I came up with the idea for the Ayahuasca Foundation because I wanted to provide a pathway for other people that were struggling in similar ways as I had been to receive a similar transformative experience the way I had. That was in 2009 that we officially founded the Ayahuasca Foundation, and we've been operating for the last 15 years. But for the last 10 years, we've been hosting research as well. And that's been really amazing. Over 12 articles have been published based on that research, and some of that has been really groundbreaking. There are two plants involved in the making of ayahuasca. One is the vine ayahuasca itself. Aya means spirit in the Quechua language, and huasca means vine. So ayahuasca is referred to as spirit vine. It is the main ingredient of ayahuasca. The second ingredient does change, but primarily it's most commonly a plant called chacruna. Scientifically, those would be ayahuasca Banisteriopsis caapi in its scientific name, and chacruna would be Psychotria viridis in its scientific name. And the Psychotria viridis plant, or chacruna, contains dimethyltryptamine as a central ingredient of the leaves, and ayahuasca contains a set of chemicals that are called monoamine oxidase inhibitors because they prevent the enzyme monoamine oxidase that is found in our gut from breaking down dimethyltryptamine, which would normally be broken down before it has a chance to be absorbed and go to our bloodstream. So by combining those two, you would make an orally activated DMT medicine. And that would be the Western conception of it, looking at the chemistry of it. But spirit vine, or ayahuasca, does not refer to the harmaline or tetraharmine, the MAOI inhibitors that the West might look at or modern science might look at. They look at the spirit. It does have chemicals that are made orally active, and dimethyltryptamine is a very unique chemical because we do produce it in our pineal glands. And according to certain studies, especially ones done by Rick Strassman, we produce a large amount of dimethyltryptamine about 7 weeks into the development of the embryo, at which point it becomes a fetus, and is suggested that the spirit enters the body at that time, and then we produce a large amount again at the moment of our death. The ayahuasca experience ceremonies are sometimes referred to as little deaths, because by flooding the system, or at least increasing the amount of dimethyltryptamine in the system, it's perceived that you're almost fooling yourself into thinking that you have died and allowing your spirit to leave the body and access information that might normally be inaccessible.
I got introduced to psychedelics probably about three and a half years ago, when everything in my life just crumbled, and realized that it was all due to my making. I started with getting into shrooms. I was going pretty deep and was getting really therapeutic value, and I was really understanding the key areas of my inner psyche that I needed to work with. But I didn't get that profound breakthrough or shake up that I know that I needed at that place. And I was in a really, really bad place. I was honestly suicidal and was contemplating ending my life. So I knew that I needed to have a major foundational shift in all of my perspectives. After exploring shrooms for several months, I felt as though I was ready to explore DMT, and I can honestly say it helped save my life. After kind of exploring and getting that reset, I took about a year and a half off and just traveled the country, and just took the time to really find out who I was and how I fit into this world. I think one of the biggest differences with DMT, it's produced naturally in your own body. I think that's what really excited me. And I think that's what a lot of the early researchers, including like Rick Strassman, who wrote that book, The Spirit Molecule, which I think anybody getting into it would probably be one of the best books to start with. The fact that it's natural in our own body, the fact that it's found in thousands and thousands of plants, my understanding that it's found in every mammal, that it's ubiquitous throughout the world, and it can be induced naturally, it can be induced through all different types of states. Our very dull 5 human senses are just that. They're the basic 5 senses to keep us alive in this time and space limited dimension. But there's so much more out there, and that's not some far out concept. The idea of tuning an antenna to pick up AM stations, FM stations, radio waves, microwaves, and that we really are picking up such a small percentage of the electromagnetic spectrum, and that there's so much more out there, and that it's really just a matter of the tools you're using to collect that information, and the antenna strength or what vibrational wavelength it's tuned into. And I think that when we get into these altered states, whether it be lucid dreaming, whether it be because of a migraine headache, or whether it be, because I just blasted off into DMT, if you're doing, holotrophic breathing, you're getting into these different abilities of heightening your antenna, where you're able to pick up on more refined and greater vibrations of energy. The power of these molecules to help people overcome trauma, and there's a whole discussion of the therapeutic value and how it can help deal with negative aspects. But then there's the whole flip side of the coin about the expanded version. Where else can it go to enrich and enhance our lives, and to what abilities can it enhance? What does that mean in the day-to-day life? That means more connection to source. That means you are some facet of God, whatever the hell that means. Once you realize that, that's the real power that you take from these realms. The knowing that there's something greater than, and that it's not to be disputed. There's too many people experiencing profound interactions with conscious entities to say that they're not there.
Not only have I personally experienced the benefits of psychedelics with psilocybin, I've experienced almost paranormal level synchronicities and communication with what may be considered a higher intelligence. Some would call it the higher self. The mushrooms for me were like having access to the most effective therapists in existence, with access to all of space and time. In a matter of just 2 years, I was able to heal more trauma than with years of therapy. I truly believe that I was able to achieve a large portion of everything that I've done due to the use of magic mushrooms. Through all of these experiences, I maintained contact and communication with what I understand as my higher self. I also believe that psychedelics may give us access to layers of reality beyond our normal perception, and within these layers may be an ecosystem of life forms and intelligences.
Question, observe, and report. Within that framework, there's a phenomenal amount that can be gleaned from the use of psychedelics. I think that there is something fantastic there. I don't know the motive of what's there and how much control you have over it. Within the framework of a psychedelic experience, what it does offer, and its greatest benefit for me, was to see my world differently. It showed me that things are not as rigid and structured and solid as once reported by my previous observation of this reality without having had that A-B experience. So psychedelics offer you the opportunity to see your world in a whole new way. And that's why it was valuable for me. Why it's also valuable in treatment scenarios and from a scientific perspective is it does offer you the opportunity to heal trauma from a hyper state of sensitivity. You're able to recognize the patterns of how trauma is being brought up to you and brought to your awareness within this hypersensitive state. And it's in the form of sometimes snakes, monsters, your ancestors, things like this, but they anthropomorphize an issue that you are able to now see in a new light that perhaps you didn't even know was there. But now with this new understanding, you're able to access those spots and heal from it. And that is phenomenal. That's powerful. Absolutely. It seems to be that we are amongst a realm amongst realms, even when we can say that consensus reality-wise, we all experience this place differently, but also there seems to be something a little extra that can take forms of anything, that can apprehend your consciousness, that can make you feel like it was an owl or that you had missing time, but you don't know why. These kind of things are fascinating. They seem to play out in very radically different scenarios based on the individual as well. There are some people who have had wonderful times after being contacted, similar in near-death experiences. People change their lives. It's fascinating when we see the influence of this intelligence.
The way that I view what could be called the spiritual dimension is simply a spectrum of frequency that is beyond our typical or normal accessibility or perception. For that, I use an example that I call the eighth note in reference to a musical scale. So if we go back to the visible spectrum, that is, as we know, 7 colors. So those 7 colors make up the visible spectrum. And in music, we have a scale that is made up of 7 notes. And the eighth note is the first note repeated again, but at a higher octave. And so that scale would then repeat again, but at a higher octave. If we were to think about that in terms of our reality being made of those 7 notes, or that spectrum of frequency divided into 7 parts, the 8th note would be the first note of the higher dimension, which would be another spectrum of frequency, another set of 7 notes, just in a realm that are imperceptible typically to us. So ayahuasca allows us to expand into that 8th note so that we have communion with the first note, or the lower frequency of a higher dimension. And that would be considered the world of spirits, or the spiritual dimension. And so by accessing that dimension, we can learn a great deal and commune with our spiritual selves, as well as the spirits of trees and plants and people who have passed on, and ancestors, and through that gain guidance so that we don't lose our way as human beings living on the earth.
These methods of consciousness exploration through altered states are usually associated with very beneficial and positive experiences, which at times seem to even include contact with spirits, intelligences, and otherworldly beings. But this kind of contact with paranormal entities goes back as far as our human history. In our ancient past, it may have been angels, demons, fairies, or nature spirits. Now, we still experience what people would call ghosts or evil spirits, but now we have the modern UFO, extraterrestrial, or abduction experiences. Human abduction by non-human entities has also been a widely reported phenomenon since the earliest of human history. But what people now experience has drastically changed over time.
My name is Karen Wilkinson, and I am the author of the book Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest. My experiences are that I was taken from my earliest memories against my will by non-human alien entities. Throughout my life, there were many different things that happened in relation to that. It happened from my earliest memories. I don't have a time in my life that I remember them not coming to take me. I don't think it was until my adult life that I realized it didn't happen to everyone. Typically, when I was little, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and this, I'm talking about a 5-6-year-old kind of time frame where you really start to get those concrete memories. Usually, I would sense that they were there. I could feel a change in the room before I even saw them. Sometimes there'd be a light in a window. Sometimes I would hear a really low vibrational hum. In the room, there would be at least two, sometimes more, of the typical gray, bulbous head, big black screen, eyes that kind of almond shaped that wrap around alien entities in my room. And I would be terrified if there was someone else in the room. I couldn't wake them up. They would just be in a state of deep, deep sleep. At that point, I would be put into a state of what I call waking paralysis. And I've had a lot of sleep paralysis throughout my life, but waking paralysis is something where you are awake, you've already been woken up, but now I can't move. Now I can't scream, I can't move, I can't fight, I can't do anything. And at that point, I would be levitated off of my bed and through a window or through a ceiling. And I remember seeing every detail of the screens and the windows sometimes, or the ceilings in whatever house I was. And it didn't matter where I was. It didn't matter what house I was at, if it was my parents' or my grandparents' house or a friend's house. I would be taken from wherever I was. And I would try to hide at night too. As a little kid, I'd try to find places to hide. I thought if I could find this big enough suitcase and get in it and zip it up, maybe I could hide from them. Usually, it would be around the time I was going to bed. Yeah, when the house was quiet, everyone else was going to sleep. It seems like once people were asleep, they would be put into a deeper state of sleep at that point. But I would be woken up, like physically awake. And I'd know I was awake because Sometimes I'd be so scared I might wet the bed, as a little kid when you're scared, things like that happen. There's so many different things that would happen that would let me know I was physically awake. As I got older, throughout my abduction experiences, I had a handler, someone I called my handler, who was the same person who was always with me. And he appeared as a man, military looking, very, very tall, very robust, very athletic kind of looking, and always there. Like the person who I was supposed to go to when I got there gave me a sense of comfort, almost like I was protected by this person because there were a lot of other entities around. As I got older, it went from just these strange experiments or what they were doing, and they didn't tell me what they were doing, but they would take different samples from my blood or from my body. They would have machines that I didn't understand what they were doing, but clearly they were examining me. As I got older, the change happened where it went from just simple, what seemed like simple observations, to pregnancies. When I was in my early 20s, I got pregnant, and I was married at the time, so it wasn't unusual that I could get pregnant. It wasn't something that was strange by any means. And I was very excited. I went to the doctor, had my blood tests, and heard the heartbeat, and got my prescription for my vitamins and all those things that you do when you first find out you're pregnant in that first trimester. And everything was going fine in the first trimester of the pregnancy. And when I got to the end of that first trimester, I woke up one night and I was feeling very badly. I had very bad abdominal pain, and went to the emergency room, and they couldn't find a heartbeat. And so they did an ultrasound. They didn't see a baby. And they came back to me after the DNC and said, "Ma'am, are you sure you were pregnant?" And, I'm just devastated at this point. And I'm like, "Of course, you can call my doctor. Why?" And they said, "Well, your uterus was clean. There was nothing in there." I was shocked. I didn't know what to think. This happened several times over and over again, to the point that I stopped going to the doctor when I'd find out I was pregnant. I would just wait because I didn't know if this was going to be one of those that went away or if it was a real pregnancy where I would have one of my children, which I'm blessed to have several children. But it's just tragic to lose a child. There were two very specific and very clear experiences that I remember. One, I was taken in a typical scenario where I would be taken, but this time I was walked down a hallway I wasn't familiar with. And I was with, I believe, a gray and like a Nordic being at that time. And they walked me down a hallway, and it was very darkly, like, backlit, almost a red color. And the hallway was lined with what looked like aquariums. They went all the way up to the top of the ceiling practically. And I remember trying so hard to focus on what was in them because it looked red, but I think that could have been the lighting, so I don't know what color the liquid was. But there were fetuses in there. I couldn't tell if they were human, non-human, animal, whatever. I couldn't tell what they were, and at various stages of development. So we get to the end of that hallway where these tanks just kind of end and the hallway goes on, but there's a door on either side, and they take me to the door to the right, open the door, and it's a room the size of a large closet. And there's a woman in there, and she was on the floor imitating childbirth, and she had a little baby with her. It didn't look human. And as I'm kind of reeling from that, the entities that are with me, they hand me this baby and they say, "This is your baby. Hold your baby. This is a good baby." And I look at this baby and I take it, and it's very small, very rigid, very compact, very dark in color, almost like a purple blue in color. And it's not really moving or responding to me, but I can tell it's mine. I can tell by how it looks. And I hold it up to me, and it won't cuddle into me. It just won't respond to me. I'm, holding this baby, and I'm getting really upset because it's not responding to me. They're like, "You can hold your baby." I got belligerent. I'm like, "I'm taking this baby. This is mine. I'm going to fix it." I just thought I could fix it. And they put me into just a sleep state. They have that ability to just turn someone on and off at will. And the next thing I know, I woke up in my bed. I mean, I could still feel that baby. I could still smell it. I was so upset. I don't know how long I cried. I had to cry all night. I did not know who they were, and I didn't understand how they were allowed to take me and why. So I wasn't able to stop them because I didn't know who they were and I didn't know what they were, and they were telling me one thing, which wasn't true, to kind of keep me there and to keep me afraid. Once I got back into my walk and started studying my Bible again and found some, people that were sharing the whole of the truth and just learning more and more, I realized who and what they were, and that was all I needed. And then I was able to confront them with that, say, wait a minute, you can't take me. I can just tell you no. I can just take that permission away and you have to stop simply by saying no and revoking those permissions, whatever covenants or bonds or agreements were made, ending those and telling them no and calling on Jesus. More and more people are wanting to talk about these things. The last 100 years, our leaps forward have been unprecedented. I definitely see changes, but I see people who are trying very hard to embrace the goodness, embrace the light. But then I also see a whole lot on the other side of that too, where people are embracing things they want to believe are benevolent. They want so bad to believe that these are our space brothers, but no matter how you slice it, it's still going to come up not so good.
There are so many more questions than answers when it comes to Karen's and many others' experiences with this kind of close encounter. There are also several different perspectives that can be explored as it relates to alien abductions. One of the concerns that are often associated with people that are religious is the possibility that these beings are not aliens from other planets and galaxies, nor are they our space brothers, but instead demonic entities attempting to deceive humanity. We can also look within the UFO extraterrestrial research community and find very diverse theories and perspectives. Everything from the classic physical beings coming from other planets to interdimensional intelligences, trickster spirits, intelligent plasma, or even maybe our own military carrying out operations and experiments.
I'm Trey Hudson. I've been interested in all things strange, since a very early age back in the 70s. Went to the University of West Georgia, studied under Bill Roll and some other people that have kind of a paranormal and high strangeness type background. I was branched as a U.S. Army intelligence officer in the reserves and went into the civil service with the Department of Defense. I served 34 years as a security specialist, doing everything from security of weapons of mass destruction, intelligence, counterintelligence, physical security, anti-terrorism, spent some time in Afghanistan, and I recently retired in May of 2023. So now I get to devote my time to the full-time study, research, and writing of all things strange, specifically areas of high strangeness. Human beings, the way we survive, the way we ran away from the saber-toothed tiger, the way we, survived in very, very austere situations and survived culturally is we put things into patterns. And when we experience something, we try to liken it, compare it, or put it into a box with something that we experienced before. That gives us a head start. That gives us very quick reaction time on staying out of danger. If a person detects, a researcher detects a heat signature in the forest that's shaped like a humanoid, a Bigfoot researcher is going to say, well, that's obviously a Sasquatch. A ufologist would say, well, that's obviously an extraterrestrial. And a paranormal researcher would say, well, that's a ghost. Well, what if it's all of those things and none of those things? Is John Keel talked about the ultra-terrestrials in various books, which were the entities, the intelligence that were just beyond our understanding. I use a term in my first book called paradimensionals. And these intelligences will present themselves in many, many different ways. Many of these phenomena are all parts of the same reality. They're all facets of the same diamond. UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, et cetera, are all part of the same reality that exists in another realm. And we're just starting to glimpse it. So when we do glimpse this, we get a little tiny taste of this reality, we tend to spin it in a way that causes the least amount of existential harm to ourselves. So a religious person would see angels, and they would maybe find comfort in that. A person that has anxiety about the abduction phenomena may see aliens and would put a very negative spin on that. And then a person who is perhaps more secular might just think of it as an interesting experience and not put a tremendous amount of value on it at all. So our own biases, our own culture, our own optics really drive the experience. And there's another theory that we actually project the experiences from ourselves, that we're actually causing this thought form to manifest in a way that's more agreeable on a positive or extremely terrifying on the negative.
One of Jacques Vallée's perspectives on this that he shared with J. Allen Hynek as well as Terence McKenna to tie the psychedelics into this part of the conversation, because it's been viewed from all of it. It is that this is possibly a psychosemantic one. And within that framework, it calls back to what we talked about the subjectivity of this realm in general. Whatever this place is, it's very personal to you. We could see this in the form of synchronicities, to preferences, music, foods, things like this. Like, this place is very tailored to you, and you will gravitate towards the things that are calling you in a direction of your mission based on just preferences that you have. We could see how already your interpretation and experience of this reality, even amongst the myriad of options, is going to be radically different than anyone else. Not because it's different because you have the same things to choose, but what you're attracted to, your experience of those things, why you saw that versus this. These kind of things are fascinating. They seem to play out in very radically different scenarios based on the individual as well. Some people say they had a fantastic time. These people, they heal everyone. They let me drive the craft around. They picked up a bunch of people from a volcano before it exploded and saved all these people. They're here to help us. They tell us that we should be taking better care of the planet. And who knows if the entities themselves were having a rough day? Who knows if the person's interpretation of the experience is radically different than what actually happened? But for whatever reason, had a really bad time with it. And they get traumatized. There is a difference between contact and abduction, and they are viewed that way by the participant, by the occupant. And again, that's subjective in nature. You can either say that you're being taken on a wonderful ride, or that they stole you and that you didn't want to go willingly. Who's to say who's controlling that? Because some people in the community will say then, well, you at a level decided that this was the kind of contact that you wanted, but you had to forget when you came here, and you just need to trust that your soul made that agreement. I have some challenges with that intellectually and emotionally for me personally, but there are some people who get by just fine on that. And there are some people who have had wonderful times after being contacted. The ability of these entities to perception manage how you feel about an experience with them, I don't know how I feel about that.
The extraterrestrial alien abduction phenomena has become much more acceptable in our modern society, especially after the recent events surrounding UFOs, like congressional hearings, mass media coverage, and even widely reported sightings.
For weeks now, New Jersey residents have been plagued by unexplained drones flying overhead.
Dozens of reports of unauthorized drones flying in the skies.
Unconfirmed reports of drone activity.
We have no idea what it is, if it's a natural phenomenon.
At least 4 commercial pilots reported mysterious bright lights.
Reports of small car-sized drones hovering over New York and New Jersey.
The government is actually lying.
The government knows what is happening. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people.
There seems to be different sides of the UFO alien enigma, what you see on TV, the news, and in movies, and what people experience for themselves. But in recent years, the scientific community, aerospace companies, the military, and billionaires have become very openly interested in studying certain locations prone to paranormal activity and UFOs. One of those more famous locations is Skinwalker Ranch in the Uinta Basin. Since we weren't able to gain access to the Skinwalker Ranch, we did the next best thing and headed over to our friend Ryan Burns' ranch, Space Wolf Research. Ryan's Space Wolf Ranch is where he hosts researchers and scientists from various fields of interest to come study the spectrum of paranormal phenomena that occurs in the area, from UFOs and alien encounters to Bigfoot, anomalous lights, and of course, skinwalkers.
Usually people from the Four Corners area will come up and teach Ute how to do it. At least the few examples that I've had, other than obviously, whose brother and mom are allegedly skinwalkers. And he's talked to me at length about it.
My name's Ryan Burns. I was a fly fishing guide in the area, just northeast of here. I had an event, an experience that kind of changed my life. Since then, I've always had an affinity for trying to figure out what happened. Back in the late 90s, I had, for lack of a better word, an experience with what people now call a skinwalker entity. Back then, I didn't know what to call it. The first time I had heard the term skinwalker was from some people I was telling about it. Since then, I basically knew that I had to be here, looking into it and researching, quit my job, and moved out here to the country to research full time. This property became available, which is known as Space Wolf Research. I purchased it because it's in very close proximity to what transpired to me. Since then, I can't believe what I've seen, but it continues on a daily basis. We're definitely not alone. It's common to see massive, almost prehistoric looking canines. In some cases, these canines will do things like run alongside travelers passing by. In other cases, they will actually go up on their hind legs and run along vehicles or engage with people in the area. There's also a wide array of what can only be described as UFOs, UAPs, portals opening up, and strange objects floating around in the sky. A skinwalker is basically this manifestation in indigenous lore. Indigenous lore is very similar to other cultures throughout the planet where they incorporate what can only be called shapeshifters, or witches that are able to change shape with the help of entities they call upon. For personal gain, typically, a number of rituals, a lot of them are very dark and some are hideous, can call upon and gain this shape-shifting trait, typically becoming the form of canines is one of their preferential forms to take. It's very well documented by anthropologists. There's a lot of literature out there. There's an actual list of items you can do to become one, and it's very prevalent in the southwestern United States, specifically the Four Corners, this particular part of the region as well. The same type of magic is found all over the planet. Interestingly enough, a lot of the same rituals, manifestations, and what is viewed can be seen from cultures all over the planet.
My full name is Alberto Gamon Chipi. I'm part of a member of the Ute tribe, and I am a member of the Uinta band. And and live with all this supernatural stuff. I don't like to talk about skinwalkers too much. What are we talking about in the first place? It's shape-shifting. It does exist in other places in different variations, different regions, and over in the Great Lakes region they have people, they would say they would transform into bears, into wolves, into different things. Because back then we had no fast transportation, we didn't have any mode of communication that was very fast. So a lot of that came from there. They would be messengers, and they can run. They were pretty much indestructible. The way I was told is that there was a spirit on this power, or the center of this. This power is hungry. If you want to equate it with something, it would be the devil. This power corrupts, but there's a price to pay for that. Now that we're seeing all these activity, you kind of grow up with that around here. You see a lot of strange things. It's just always been a contentious place. My elders, the old men would tell us, he said, it's because our people are living on this power points, on these, what they call vortexes, or what our people would say they're power points. If you see the swirls out in the petroglyphs, you'll see one going the one way and the other one going counterclockwise. They had a purpose and a reason why. And you'll see them to this day in other tribes. They'll use those in their ceremonies. And that's what they're for, the portals or doors. Because when we're taught, like in a Lakota way and a Dakota way, Wanagis and spirits, they know what doors are. They know what windows are. There's always an element of that, there was a portal that exists, or portals. We would say these are the star people. These things are coming from obviously somewhere, it's somewhere far, but it's so close at the same time. These things, we never looked at them as being foreign, like alien, how we call them alien. See, we wouldn't call them alien. We call them star people. There's also the bad entities, and there's these bad things that occur. Natives throughout time, we adjusted to this land, we adjusted to environment, just as we would hunt and chase the buffalo and do all these things that we knew about the flow of this and that. We were also attentive to those things. Like in a Lakota tradition, they call them the Iktomi stories, or the trickster. Ghosts, UFOs, and all types of things coming from somewhere.
He was a gentleman I knew well. He was out one day in this field near this irrigation ditch, and he had a UFO, for lack of a better word, swoop down and get so close to him that he had to jump into the water. And he said it was like he could feel the heat coming off of it. It was the brightest light he'd ever seen, and he jumped into the ditch, like to fully submerge himself in the water to not be burned. And when he came out, he had basically a full sunburn, and it took weeks to recover from, and he ended up dying of cancer. It happens. A lot of interesting stuff.
Our experience at Space Wolf Research was fascinating, beautiful, and at times disturbing. Although we weren't able to catch anything on camera while we were there, Ryan's 360 UFO camera was able to pick up some very interesting images while we slept. One of those images seemed to show a beam of orange light with no source over one of the structures on his property. And the next day, Ryan found this strange piece of metal debris, which he is having analyzed. Now, the days following the trip were very difficult. It seemed that there was a heaviness that followed us home, and this dark energy that was surrounding my wife Jennifer and I for quite a few days after the trip. The evening we got home, I got a message from Ryan. He said he found an animal pelt in one of the units closest to the one where we slept. It was not ours, and it wasn't Ryan's. According to the lore, the individual attempting the skinwalker transformation would wear the pelt of the animal that they seek to become. It wasn't until I found a rock that I had picked up while I was there and put in my bag, completely forgot about it. I actually thought I had gotten rid of it. So we brought it to the nearest river, apologized, said a prayer, and got rid of it. And thankfully, the negative energy followed with it. Although I'll always have more questions than answers, it does seem that our perception will heavily affect the nature of these experiences. Our beliefs, our emotions, and our fears all seem to heavily influence the nature of these experiences. One of the biggest questions for me, and always will be, is what lies beyond this life, the afterlife? And can dreams, altered states, ghosts and hauntings, and non-human intelligences help us understand what lies beyond?
I have been retired from the ministry. I was an ordained minister for 40 years. Rather than go the way most retired ministers go, I wanted to get in touch with the essential spirituality that I'd been preaching about for my whole life. I wanted to confront the essential spiritual reality that I knew was there, but I had never really felt like I came to appreciate. So I moved out to the woods, in my case, the woods of South Carolina. My idea was to spend 1 year living in the woods on a kind of a spiritual retreat. And that was 16 years ago. I wanted to basically, to put it bluntly, confront God. And my prayer was answered in a wonderful way, not the way I expected. It didn't come to me through traditional Christian practices. Probably that wouldn't have worked in my case by then anyway. Instead, I began to confront the spirituality that I'd been seeking for in the roots of one of the world's oldest religions, which was shamanism. I began to have out-of-body experiences. I began to dowse for earth energy, and in dowsing for earth energy, I learned how to communicate with actual spirits, with actual entities in different dimensions that the very cells of my body were entangled with, as is the case for all of us. I grew to really understand that there is so much more that we just don't have time for in this busy, loud, noisy life that we lead. I'm almost convinced that when we die, we carry with us a certain kind of expectation of what to us would be the essential beauty of going to the new place, whether we call it heaven or whatever we call it. I'm sure that that's really a blessing, because I think what that does is it calms us. We're not just thrown into something that's unfamiliar, totally unfamiliar, but it's very real when they come back.
I'm Lindsay Sharman, and I'm a spiritual teacher and healer, as well as an experiencer of many paranormal and spiritual awakenings. I had a lot of interaction with my spiritual guides and allies. I didn't always know it. When I was young, I seemed to always be talking with someone or something. One of my earliest experiences of really understanding that we were more than our body, or that consciousness existed after death, was when my father had passed away. And a few months after his death, I was walking through a field alone. I was walking home from school, and I was just wondering whether or not that could happen, that people could die and they could still somehow exist, or that you could still somehow talk to them or see them or anything like that. And as I was wondering whether or not that was possible, I seemed to feel a wind move towards me. It was very warm and loving and inviting. There didn't seem to be wind anywhere else around me. As I was noticing that happening, I also felt my hand being held, and I just heard or just understood, like, yes, I am still here, or we are still here, or this consciousness still exists. And it was really beautiful. It was very profound. Even at the time, I understood that we exist beyond our bodies.
As humans, we seem to be born with a strong connection to whatever it is that communicates from the other side. I believe it's always there. It's just up to us to become aware of it.
I think a lot of people have this pattern too, where they're like, when I was little, I used to know, right? I understood like this connection to source or God or heaven or angels or whatever people want to describe the light as. We seem to be trained out of that skill. We're born with it. We know it. Just like we're born with intuition, just like we're born with psychic impulse, all sorts of skills and gifts that we seem to get trained out of. Babies still have this. And then as we get older and older, we are noticing it often, but our parents are in many different ways showing us that it doesn't matter, or that no one cares, or that no one's looking at that. We're born and we have all of these skills, and then we slowly grow out of them. We're shown by the world that they don't matter. One of my favorite things about the universe is that it will talk back to you. If you ask a question, it's going to get answered. If you ask for help, you're going to get it. It might not look or sound how you want it to. It might be in some form that you did not think was what you wanted, but was actually exactly what you asked for. But it always happens. And all of this is planned. Everything is synchronicity. I do think we get to choose at the highest level, but it's not at the level of like, I want to catch this bus to this equator at this time and do this thing. It's a much higher level than that.
My name is Dan Liss. I have been doing metaphysical work for more than 40 years. Synchronicity is one of those beautiful things that happens because sometimes people are looking for maybe some kind of sign or signal about something going on in their life, and all of a sudden something will just pop up. Like, for example, many people have had that experience, like you're thinking about somebody else and then they call you. There are many, many instances like that where something will come up that seems totally unconnected, but then it helps to address something that's on that person's mind. When I say spirit guides, I mean, like, I feel like every one of us has a team of them throughout our life. And I kind of consider them all part of the same team. So that, for example, if you believe in guardian angels, well, that's good. That's one. Ancestors, we all have ancestors. And of course, if our ancestors hadn't done a good job, that we wouldn't be here now. In our lifetime, then one of our team members and our spirit guides will be some of those ancient ancestors who want to see us do well. I stress gratitude, that when you are thanking Spirit for helping you find a solution, that oftentimes that's what opens the door for them to communicate with you and bring you a solution, so that when you're trying to make some change in your life, instead of saying, please, I hope this works out, you're going, thank you for helping me get this done. And I think that that also makes a stronger connection with your spirit guides, because then you're acknowledging them, but you're also making a link. You know, where your thoughts goes, your energy goes. And that's why it's important to consider how you think. When you're thinking thoughts of gratitude, you know, it's what they say is the more you express gratitude, the more you get to be grateful for. But if you walk around all the time being fearful of everything, then you get things to be fearful of.
The accounts from those that have had near-death experiences can be very similar. Although they may be greeted by different beings or relatives, angels or deities, and may even observe varying landscapes and surroundings, there have also been very terrifying and negative experiences reported as well. But in every case that I've heard, Even if the experience is initially negative, it seems to transition into something very positive and beautiful. What may be perceived as hell or purgatory becomes heaven, and what may appear as demons or monsters become angels. In almost every case, when a person comes back from that experience, they have a much different perspective about almost everything in their lives. It may be that our perception of reality at the time of death carries over to the other side.
A few years ago, I volunteered to help out with the International Association for People with Near-Death Studies. So I got to hear a lot of their talks, and I found it really interesting that all of the people who told their story about when they died and came back all told that story of going up through a tunnel of light, and that's where their family and friends who had gone before them were waiting to greet them. And so they were happy to go there and meet with them. And they said that transition was not bad at all, but every one of them reported somebody up there in the spirit realm gave them a push on the shoulder and said, "You got to get back down there because your work isn't done." I found it interesting that there was such a universal story. And of course, having been raised as a strict Catholic, of course, I was raised with the notion of heaven and hell. But I found it interesting that all of the people telling their stories about how they died and came back, not a one of them said, "Well, when I died, I was sentenced to hell." So my picture of it now is that like it's a huge recycling center we all go through. And spirit decides whether we need to go around again or whether we're done with this incarnation and we get to migrate up to the next level. And I think that certainly coincides with what we call karma and, of course, past lives. Spirit sends us around again when we got more lessons to learn.
The center of the physical universe from which everything else is spiraling out in two directions is heaven. That is source, and it is where we go when we die, and it's where we jump back out of when we come back into physical existence. And also we go there many times in between. People don't remember it usually, but even if you astral travel, you may have been back for a moment. And in my opinion, everyone astral travels, they just don't always remember it. So, you've probably actually gone and not remembered, and the ability to go and bring back information about it is really about our level of consciousness. We can't always hold on to the things that we aren't quite ready to integrate into our physical, linear seeming, experience of life. God is, there's no other thing to say after that, actually, because anything you look at is God, and anything that has ever happened is God, and anything that ever will happen is God. Anywhere you can go is God. Any place and time is God. Even the things that look so far away from what we think God is are also God being God. All of it.
You can learn about this stuff intellectually, as you well know. And it's great, and you learn a lot, but this is not an intellectual pursuit we're talking about. We're going someplace, as a matter of fact, where intellectual ideas and where science even cannot go. I was using the intellectual approach that I had been taught, and that most of us had been taught, that when a person dies, their brain shuts down, and in the process of shutting down, the blood cells are not meeting certain places, and neurons aren't firing right, and they have illusions. But here they are, doctors who have gone through it. A lot of them don't accept it. And it's beginning to gain traction now, because in most big hospitals, as soon as a person dies and comes back, if they have been declared clinically dead, if they've been flatlined and comes back, they are usually talking to somebody, some expert in the field, within minutes, as soon as they can, while the memories are still fresh. And they've even done experiments, such as printing signs and putting them up near the ceiling of the room. So when people tell the idea of leaving their body and floating up from their body, which is a very, very common experience, and looking down and seeing their body, they're actually reporting on seeing these signs. Medicine has had to say, they used to say back in the 70s, when a person's heart is stopped, they're dead. But then we learned how to keep people going after their heart stopped. So then they said, well, when their brain stops, then they're dead. But then we learned how to keep people going when they were so-called brain dead. What fascinates me about all of these things is that if this is true, it could change life here on the planet. Because if this is true, and we know that every single one of us is going to die, and if we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, even science is telling us that we go on to another life, it's going to make so many of the things that we do here on this planet unimportant.
It feels like we're gods in training. It feels like that this is a training ground, a sort of danger room in the X-Men world where we're learning how to navigate this place, learning what we determine to be right from wrong. Even though the world around us is completely bass-backwards and inverted, this isn't a place I feel to be fixed. I feel it's a place to learn and grow and enhance your ability to rule in a very sovereign but very peaceful way. And this place is where you got to find your inner peace. And within your inner peace is where you can start to really create from a really interesting perspective if we're here to create. From the other side of this, I would say that to David Icke's point, it's an interesting concept when we think of the demiurge and we think of that this is one of a soul trap sort of a realm. If we think of it like that, if we zoom out a little bit, you'd say, why? Is this a hell? Are we punishing ourselves? And you get into all that. But what if that energetic exchange is actually to power something and we are just sentient components of a machine that's really an energetic exchange on some other level? So if you think of it this way, then no, nobody wants to be the byproduct of something that's called loosh, that's actually farmable by some machine that's up there at the top of our dome that's just sucking this stuff out. I would like to think that for right now, if that is the case, then we've just bumped up against the walls of the prison and maybe we can break out of it this time. I don't feel it's hopeless, but I also don't take the hope from the people who have had near-death experiences. And you look at all the strife, all the challenges, and things are very personal to you, and it gets your mind at creating a prison for yourself. Now, when we look at it that way, that's an interesting concept because you're holding the keys to your own prison here. That is where we need to constantly test the boundaries of our environment. I feel that this is a place of mental prison. If that's the case, then what the NDEs' job is to come back and report to us that what we are looking forward to is right on the other side of all of this, whatever this is. And if you don't make it here what you want it to be and believe those people, then what you possibly have to look forward to is an opportunity to come back. Because what those people do offer is a new love of this place, a love of this realm, a love of this life, the way it is, and a can't wait to go back into that light to be reunited with those ancestors as they were promised. And then also a new love for the afterlife.
We tend to cruise around through life looking at the glass half full. And if you look at the world through that lens, things will tend to be negative. You will focus on the negatives. And I liken it to somebody who is looking for offenses, and they will always find offense in everything, other than a person who's always looking at love, and they'll find friendship and love in everything. Perspective is very important. And, some of the most primal, fears that human beings have, one is lack of control. The other is being taken, abducted. And the third one is the unknown. The ones that look at it from a very positive perspective find peace, and they find help and guidance from it. The world is an amazing place. Drop your electronics, turn your phone off, bring your head up and look around, and you're going to find it's much more amazing, much more wonderful, and much more beautiful than you can even imagine.
It seems that every new layer of understanding that we can achieve just reveals more layers to uncover. In my pursuit of trying to understand these universal mysteries, I have not found one singular answer to any of this phenomenon, but yet an entire universe of possibilities. There's a piece of the puzzle within everyone's experience, and the only way to solve it is to put those pieces together. There are profound connections between dreams, altered states, paranormal phenomena, non-human contact, synchronicities, and near-death experiences. And the state of our perception at the time of any given experience seems to influence our perspective of that event. If there's any truth that I've found looking at all of this, it's that there is much more to this life than I could have ever thought possible, and we are truly connected to something greater. I will continue these explorations into the nature of our reality and beyond in Part 2 of Doors of Perception.
On this road, do you remember the time we saw that ritual with the guy hanging from between the two stakes over the fire? So there's a guy naked hanging between two stakes, massive stakes, with like hooks in his skin, over a fire, a campfire, like moving around, like, and it was like part of like this multi-day vision quest ceremony. There's all sorts of different paths. It's a lot like, you know, saying, oh, well, I'm a part of the great work. It's like, well, are you Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn? Are you, Rosicrucian? Are you, there's a Freemason? There's a lot of different pathways that one can kind of cater these teachings to their own lifestyles. Up here, this ridge line that goes along here, Skinwalker Ridge, you'll see an area known as Werewolf Point up here where, for lack of a better word, many shapeshifters have been seen, skinwalker looking entities, and that's right up here on the right. Gentleman that lives over here had one where he saw one, he took a shot at it, and he thinks he hit it, but then the next day he was visited by some MIBs who had GPS, like Earth satellite images of him doing it. And yeah, this gentleman right here, you could probably talk to him. He'll tell you the story. This area over here used to be a known skinwalker hangout below the waterfall. Remember, there's a waterfall over here. And this area right here, if you follow that road in, there's a little circle at the base of a waterfall. And they would show up at specific times, inclement weather, new moons, also cosmic cycles. And they're usually in threes. Skinwalkers usually roll in threes. And they would sit there, and I found a perch from the top due to a friend of mine, a native friend, that said, if you go during these times, you'll probably see them or hear them. And I looked down, and they make a little fire, just small enough, but not too big to draw attention. And I saw them kind of leaning in and out of the fire doing their ritual. And as they leaned in and out, the flames would like grow and expand when they leaned in and then go down when they leaned out, which I thought was like, whoa, the wildest thing I've ever seen.